I would like to call to order the teleconference meeting of the Building and Operating Committee of Thursday, November 18th, 2021. It is 9:52 a.m. according to the clock on my phone. Before we begin, please note this meeting is being recorded. Madam Secretary, the roll, please.
Thank you. Director Cochran.
Here.
Director Conroy. Absent. Director Fredericks. Director Fredericks absent. Director Hernandez. Absent. Director Mastin.
Here.
Director Rabbit.
Here.
Vice Chair Garbarino.
Here.
Chair Terrio.
Here.
And President Parr.
Present.
Thank you. You have a quorum. Also on the line, you have Director Grosbull, Director Hill, Director Rodoni, and Director Snyder. So you are a committee of the whole. I'm going to confirm staff on the line. Dennis Mulligan.
Present.
Joe Wire.
Yes.
Eva Bar Furbish.
Present.
Perfect. Kim Enolius. Kim Enolius, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, perfect. We can continue. We have an attorney on the line. Steve Miller.
Present. Good morning.
Thank you. Mona Babauta.
Present.
Jim Swindler.
Present.
And Kelly Hopper.
Present.
Perfect. That confirms everyone on our line.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Here follows our standard announcement. Please be reminded, everyone, mute your phones until after staff's presentation. And remember to unmute and identify yourself when we open up for the record discussion. If there are comments or questions, the Secretary or I will call on you accordingly. Following our discussion, we will ask for any public comment before moving on. Please follow along by referring to the page numbers located on the bottom of your meeting packet. So to jump right into the meat of things, we'll start with agenda item number 3 to approve actions relative to the adoption of bicycle safety recommendations for the Golden Gate Bridge and amend the master ordinance accordingly. The staff report that also includes an attachment of comments received through the process begins on page 3. And Steve Miller is on the line to present the report. Mr. Miller, go ahead, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Therio, members of the committee. Stephen Miller, Deputy General Manager, Bridge Division. The item before you is a culmination of a very lengthy planning and public outreach process, and we have a slate of recommendations for bicycle and pedestrian safety to move forward today. So the staff is requesting that the committee recommend to the Board of Directors this slate of recommendations. Many of you are likely familiar with them by now, but for the purpose of the record, or those who are not, I will go ahead and walk through them briefly. So recommendation number 1, establish a maximum speed limit of 15 miles an hour for bicycles on the bridge sidewalks, along with a 5-mile-per-hour maximum speed in the areas on the sidewalks adjacent to the bridge towers. And include language in the master ordinance that subjects to the requirements that all bicycles shall be operated at a speed no greater than what is reasonable for safe operation or in a manner that endangers others. Recommendation number 2, amend the master ordinance to allow pedal-assisted electric bicycles or e-bikes of classes 1, 2, and 3 to use the bridge sidewalks. Recommendation number 3, amend the master ordinance to clarify the list of devices prohibited on the bridge sidewalks to include other pedestrian-type rolling conveyances, and I will expand on that a little more in a moment. Recommendation number 4, establish a district bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee to ensure that we continue and make ongoing the engagement with our bicycle and pedestrian user groups of the bridge, bus, and ferry systems. And a draft, those 4 initial recommendations require board action, and a draft of the ordinance language is included in your packet, and that is on pages 119 to 126. These additional recommendations do not require board action, but we wanted to include them so everybody is aware. Many of these recommendations came through the excellent public outreach process that we've been working on for the last couple of years. I've learned in my career that if you want to understand a process or improvement, it's always smart to talk to those who are actually doing it, and we got some really excellent feedback and suggestions during our engagement period. And so we have a really solid list of recommendations here that I think will really go far to further bicycle and pedestrian safety on the sidewalks. So those are continued signage and pavement markings on the east sidewalk to delineate space between bikes and pedestrians. We do have markings out there, but we're going to add to that and refresh and make sure that we have all we can in terms of signaling to folks where they should be on the sidewalks. Number 2 here, install directional wayfinding signage for cyclists on the bridge approaches. This is something that the bicycle community made clear would be very helpful and is particularly important as we deal with wind issues on the west sidewalk, so that we can indicate to cyclists the times when we will allow cyclists to use the east sidewalk due to weather conditions. Number 3, continue use of radar speed advisory signage. There's already 6 radar advisory signs on the bridge. We're going to expand on that and include the narrow downhill approaches to the North Anchorage House area where the sidewalk narrows. That is one of the clear areas of concern as we heard from the public and folks weighed in on things. Path narrow signage, object markers, pavement markings, 5 mile per hour advisory signage in that same narrow sidewalk section at the North Anchorage housing. We will install number 5, additional high wind advisory signage, and establish a standard operating procedure whereby the security department can open the east sidewalk to cyclists during west sidewalk hours if the wind becomes a problem. Number 6, create a weather station feed to the district website to advise cyclists of current weather conditions so that they can make decisions prior to making their trip across the bridge. We already have a weather station at Midspan, and this would be to expand upon that and make that information available to the public. Number 7, create a sidewalk safety incident reporting tool on the district website to collect additional information about safety issues on the sidewalks. We've already developed that and implemented that. There were concerns that our incident reporting wasn't complete because we only generate incident reports when Bridge Patrol responds, and we know that there's lots of incidents on the sidewalks where folks sort of dust themselves off and continue, but we want to hear about those and understand them so that they can be included in future decision making about safety on the sidewalks. Just to summarize, we're dealing with a constrained and heavily utilized resource. The district wants to, as a transportation provider, encourage alternative modes of travel, but we still have a overarching responsibility to ensure safety for everybody out there using the sidewalk. This slate of recommendations is just an attempt to optimize the conditions, given the constraints that we're dealing with. In terms of background, as I said, over the last couple of years, we've been engaged in a review of bike safety policies, current conditions. We produced a bicycle safety study for the Golden Gate Bridge in cooperation and collaboration with Alta Planning and Design, and it was rolled out to this committee at its February 2021 meeting. During that initial outreach and development of the study, we engaged with the local bicycle community, the local bike coalitions, vendors of bike share and rental bikes, and that outreach was taken into account as we developed the study. Once we had the study and recommendations in hand, we continued the public outreach, and that was during the fall of this year, September and October, with a web-based virtual open house and a live webinar-style town hall workshop to shop the list of recommendations and get feedback. And that public outreach culminated in a formal public hearing with the board on October 18th, 2021. So I'll just sort of walk through the public outreach and try and summarize the things that we heard. So we conducted a virtual open house. It was a web-based series of web pages that outline the findings and recommendations of our bicycle safety study. That open house was live from September 24th through October 10th of this year. 200 participants were asked to respond to a Likert type scale, basically a slider 1 to 5, whether they strongly disagree or strongly agree with the statement that these recommendations will make the Golden Gate Bridge safer for cyclists and pedestrians. That's in the table on page 5, the responses. 258 participants responded, and you see the distribution there, basically a normal distribution. Not a mandate one way or the other, but certainly didn't indicate strong disagreement with the study recommendations as well. As part of that virtual open house, participants were asked to share narrative comments with us, and 209 participants did that. A lot of the comments and suggestions were not directly related to the recommendations as outlined in the open house materials. We heard of those comments and suggestions. We heard a lot about issues with construction activities and stored materials and equipment on the sidewalks. We heard a lot about the wind issues on the west sidewalk due to the wind retrofit. We heard a lot about issues related to inexperienced cyclists and what can be done to help with that. And then we heard a lot about infrastructure issues in terms of narrow sidewalk sections, limited sightline turns, and things of that nature. So the table on page 6 categorizes and attempts to outline the comments that were directly related to the scope of the recommendations included in the open house materials. So you'll see that it tends to indicate, mixed bag of support for the speed limits, and some folks that thought speed limits would be ineffective. We heard a lot of comments, that were very appreciative of the district's effort to engage with the public and push forth new safety initiatives on the bridge. Certainly there was a lot of comments that, weren't directly related, but those are all included in pages 11 through 67 of your packet, a complete accounting of everything we heard. So following up and to supplement the virtual open house, there's some folks who, like to engage directly with us. So on October 6th of this year, we conducted a live web-based virtual town hall style meeting. During that meeting, our consultant Alta laid out the study recommendations and the key findings of the study. And then we had a live question and answer dialogue for the participants to ask questions or make comments. So as Alta wrapped up their presentation, we went through the Q&A session and attempted to answer everyone's questions or address their comments. Just to be sure, a categorization of the town hall comments are on the top of page 7 in the table. Those are the comments that were directly related to the materials included in the town hall. A full accounting of the Q&A submissions are included on pages 69 to 75 of the packet. Additionally, just to ensure that we addressed everyone's questions and concerns, we went through and took all the submissions and created a document that was basically the district's response to all the questions that were answered. That document was posted on our website, and we sent out email notifications to everybody who participated that they could go back and take a look at that document. That's included on pages 77 to 86 of your packet. The public outreach process culminated in a formal public hearing with the Board of Directors on October 18th of this year. 45 people submitted written comments during the comment period and oral testimony was received from 11 participants. In this case, written comments were, nearly evenly distributed among those sort of top 4 areas of concern we heard about during the town hall and the virtual open house, and that was construction materials and equipment on the sidewalk, concerns about the scope or methodology of the study, we heard a lot of requests not to restrict other pedestrian type rolling conveyances, or what's commonly referred to as personal electric vehicles, and requests for signage indicating that this new self-reporting tool is available so that folks traveling the bridge will be aware of it and be able to avail themselves of that opportunity to share that information with us. So a summary of the public comments received during the public hearing or the comment period are at the bottom of page 7, and that table continues on to the top of page 8. You'll see the number 1 frequency was construction materials and equipment on the sidewalks, and I will address that here in just a moment. Full accounting of all written comments received during the public comment period are included, and they are on pages 87 to 118 of your packet. So, what did we learn from this? What are the conclusions? Obviously, this list of recommendations being put before you today goes beyond the original slate of recommendations that were included in the study. This, was due to extensive engagement with sidewalk user and stakeholder groups, and we heard a lot of very creative and really good ideas about things we can do out there. Again, if you want to improve a process, talk to those who are actively engaged in it. It appears that, comments received largely favor the policy decision to allow all classes of electric bicycles. Some disagree, but by and large, most folks feel that all classes of electric bicycles should be allowed access to the bridge sidewalks. And it appears that commenters, generally accept the notion that establishing the maximum speeds won't be unduly burdensome on cyclists and will improve safety for all users. Concerning continued restrictions on other user groups and devices, pedestrian rolling type conveyances such as motorized boards, electric scooters, electric personal assistive mobility devices, personal electric vehicles. The feedback is loud and clear that folks want us to consider allowing those conveyances, those other modes on the sidewalks. However, our consultant Alta and staff agrees, recommends restricting those other modes, at least until more complete safety data and peer-reviewed studies are available that would indicate their suitability for use on the sidewalks in a safe manner. So we'll continue to monitor that. Certainly we have put forth the notion of a bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee, and that certainly could be under the purview of that committee to continue getting feedback and monitoring the development of those alternative modes of transportation and technologies. The remaining list of proposals here, generally have broad support. Many of them came through the outreach process, and certainly the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee establishment is, folks were loud and clear that that was something that was necessary and needed. So that is included in this package of recommendations. We heard a lot of other suggestions. We heard a lot about the construction activities on the sidewalks. We heard about folks requesting that we open lanes of traffic to cyclists, reconfigure sidewalk infrastructure, suggestions that we limit or restrict or regulate the use of rental bicycles and things of that nature. All of this feedback and all these comments certainly, indicate to staff that, one thing's very clear: the bridge is a fully utilized and often oversubscribed transportation resource for the community. At this juncture, we can't shuffle priorities. The suicide deterrent system is a major priority to the district, and on the heels of that will be coming the seismic retrofit phase 3B, and a lot of ongoing bridge maintenance and construction projects. So at this time, we cannot consider any major infrastructure improvements on the sidewalk, at least until we've completed these other critical bridge projects. So this slate of recommendation is really intended to do what we can do now to optimize the utility of what we have available out there, and make it safe and accessible, and maximize the utility for all users to the extent possible, and make this an iterative process. I think it was a really great learning experience for staff to hear from a whole lot of folks on what goes on out there and what's needed and what's suggested. So we want to, create an ongoing, iterative process of engagement with the user groups, and that will be facilitated through the establishment of this Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We're, a little thin on details at the moment, but it will mimic, inform, and function our other advisory committees, and we'll have a report out to the board once we've established and start conducting business there. In terms of fiscal impact, none of these are major, expenditures at this point, so we have available funds in our current operating budget to get done what we need to get done this year, and then ongoing expenditures for maintenance of signage and other improvements will be included during future budget cycles. Again, you have attachments, the comments received during the public outreach process, along with the draft ordinance language consideration. And with that, Mr. Chair, that's my report, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. That was thorough. I do want to, right off the bat, to thank the public for their engagement on this. I think we had well over 100 pages of densely packed comments in our materials for today. I actually have reviewed them all, although I confess I have not memorized them. And I run into some names I know there, including one individual with whom I've ridden myself. So hello, Jack Holmgren, and a few others whom I know from other contexts. I do ride. I have a little better than 6,200 miles on a bicycle so far this year. I've been across the bridge, not regularly, but frequently, probably a few dozen times this year. I've been across it under almost all conditions and at all times of the day or night, including in the wee, dark 0000 hours of the morning. So I am familiar with some of the concerns and raised, and have actually raised some of them myself, along with some of the suggestions raised by the public to staff. I want to note that the concerns, suggestions, not all of them that we've heard from the public would necessarily be covered in an amendment to the master ordinance. That does not mean that the district will not take them up and address them at some point, preferably sooner rather than later. And I ask for your continued engagement in that regard. Before moving on to questions or comments from directors, I do have a couple of questions on the specific language of the amendment myself, but I will put them off until we've heard from directors, because some of them may raise them. And in that regard, I'm glad for the presence of Director Hill on the line. I genuinely prize his knowledge and wisdom on this subject. And not to put you on the spot here, Bert, but yes, to put you on the spot. So with that, are there any questions or comments from directors on this item?
This is Bert. I have questions and comments.
Okay. Go ahead, Bert.
Okay. First of all, the question is pretty simple one. how do you enforce the speed limits and some of the other conditions there? Do you give out speeding tickets or something like that? Is it an enforcement or is it just a warning?
That's a great question, Director Hill. This will actually be an enforceable speed limit under the California Vehicle Code. The requirements to establish a speed limit are generally to perform an engineering and traffic survey, a speed survey, and hold a public engagement process, all of which we have done. The hope is that social norms and peer pressure and just the notion that we do have a established speed limit will have the effect of calming traffic on the sidewalks, and that's our hope. However, if we do have issues with, excessive speed out there, the California Highway Patrol can use LiDAR and cite under Vehicle Code Section 22405. The speed limits were sort of a compromise to get us to allow all classes of electric bikes, and as there's capable of, especially Class 3, are capable of some pretty high speeds. And the speed limits we're seeing, the discussion was had that, we can accommodate these faster vehicles, but we need to have a speed limit. Some of the comments we heard was, you let Lamborghinis on the roadway, they just have to not go, 200 miles an hour.
Okay. Well, thank you. Just to respond back on that, theoretically, the bicyclists, I think, are still subject to the 85% rule that we have in California. But I don't want to go any further with that. Just a comment. The comments that I have is, let's see, the likely, on page 5, you refer to the Likert scale. And let me say first, this is the most thorough analysis on bicycling I have ever seen. I have ever read, and like Director Terrio, I did read all the way through it. And I was just amazed, incredible the amount of interest and passion that went into this. So this is certainly a good thing, and it's certainly a good thing for all of us to understand that it isn't only automobiles that are interested in this bridge. The Likert scale suggests that in spite of all the work, a majority, or 42% disagree, 29% are neutral, and 28% more or less agree. So it means that we should go on with perhaps something on the website that actually kind of addresses some of the things that, have, like, and so they don't need to bring it up with us, that it's available to see how those are addressed. And just a suggestion, something on the website. The idea of a advisory committee is excellent. I was surprised by the comments of David Pilpel of integrating it with the accessibility. I see pros and cons to that. I'm not sure I would totally agree, but it's certainly worth discussion. Let's see. As far as I really appreciate your comment on personal devices, because if you remember in the previous sessions, I have asked for better statistics on them as we go along, and you acknowledged that. Thank you, Steve, very much for doing that. Relative to one thing that I happened to notice, and I did send Dennis a little note on it, the second most popular bridge in the United States just added a bike lane to the Brooklyn Bridge. They took away a traffic lane and replaced it with a bike lane. And it evicted bike lane. If we continue having the 17 to 20% reduction, and I realize that this is overly simple because it just assumes it's that way all the time. So there's different times of day, different times of night. I would like us to look at, when we get through with these huge capital items that we're doing this year, next year, and into the third year, that we do consider looking at putting in a two-way bike lane. The Brooklyn is 8 feet wide. Technically, it's supposed to be 10, but we could probably get a break on that. And I would think that 8 might be able to almost fit in with it. And certainly our studies would have to be done, but that would be a big difference because most of the bicyclists traveling on it are planning on traveling somewhere else. They're not just going back and forth. And I'll address that part in just a moment. But this gives an opportunity for solving an awful lot of the problems that we have with it. And there's a way that we can really encourage a lot more people to travel that way. As to the cost, it's possible, again, with the money that we're putting into climate and looking to encourage methods of getting to where we need to get without polluting the earth, then it's possible that we could actually have a subsidized system, maybe by CARB or something like that. Now, I realize I'm talking way out strategically on this, but that could actually cover costs so we could actually earn money from that loss of congestion on the bridge. The last item I want to address is one thing that wasn't really touched very often on there, just a couple of times, is that if we're going to encourage people to use electric bikes, and essentially we will if we open this up to where people can do it, I would recommend that we consider charging stations for bikes where the parking lot is right now, or somewhere like that people can get a recharge if they need to, and also a way of parking your bikes or having a service that will protect your bikes where you can check them in and encourage people, if they're going to want to look at the scenery and everything, to walk on the bridge, not to ride in the walking area. And I think that would be a win-win all the way around for everyone if we could devote ourselves, again, strategically into, instead of having just another parking lot that fossil vehicles can park in conveniently, we encourage the people who are neutral on zero use to be able to have some of those options, at the entry to the bridge to make it more comfortable for them. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.
This is Dennis. There's a lot of suggestions there. I would offer that at this juncture, staff is not recommending that we close the traffic lane on the bridge to make it a bike lane. With respect to the other suggestions, we think that the new Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee is a great venue to sort through Bert's suggestions and other suggestions in terms of making it more enticing for people to come to the bridge, use their bikes. And so there's some good suggestions there that we look forward to discussing with the advisory committee. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Ms. Cochran.
Yes,
Steve, a great job on this whole report. I'm not quite as thorough as Bert reading through the whole thing, but I'm just kind of the question with the speed. I asked that last go around, and of course Bert followed up this time. I'm curious at what wind speed do you shut down the west side and move them over to the east side? Is there a number? Like we had in Crest City last week, we had gusts up to 70 miles an hour, which of course, when we get that kind of wind, it shakes the bridge pretty good. But at what speed will we shut down the west side, moving to the east side?
Yeah, that's a great question, Director Cochran. It's sort of discretionary because it depends on wind direction as well. The number that's in my mind as we craft the operating procedure or the policy is somewhere around 20 to 25. We would open the east sidewalk to cyclists so that, those who are most affected by the wind could, seek the shelter of the east sidewalk. We did hear loud and clear through the public outreach that it was not a popular idea that we would ever close the west sidewalk completely to cyclists. So those, intrepid souls who feel they can brave the west sidewalk would. Our stated policy is that the bridge is available to cyclists 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, the only situation where we see, closing the sidewalks, either sidewalk to cyclists is, if we had to generally close the bridge to traffic as well. And, that's something that happens quite infrequently, I think 3 times in the history of the bridge.
So in reality, what you do, you say, hey, we got a wind advisory. You should be using the east side, but you wouldn't shut down the west side. I mean, you'll leave that open regardless.
Yeah, and you know, we always try to leave, you know, those sort of decisions to the discretion of the folks that are on scene, the officer in charge of the security department. But generally, the policy would say during adverse wind conditions, you know, let the bikes use the east sidewalk, and that's where that directional wayfinding signage system becomes really important, because that would give us the opportunity to indicate the cyclists as they approach the bridge that it's the high wind conditions, the east sidewalk is open to you if you choose to use that path. And then, you know, the weather advisory system becomes really important there too, because if I'm a cyclist and I'm getting ready to leave for my trip, I can check the wind conditions and make a decision about whether I want to use another mode or, you know, brave the bridge under the high winds.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. This is Chair Terrio again. I'm among those cyclists who would prefer the crosswinds on the west to the crowds on the east. So good to have that option still open. Are there other directors with questions or comments?
This is Dick Groswell. I did have a question or two.
Please go ahead, Director Gross.
Actually, to follow up on Bert's question on who would issue the tickets, the CHP, but would also the bridge officials have the ability to issue tickets for speeding?
That's a great question, Director Grosball. It would be exclusively the CHP. The highway is the exclusive jurisdiction of the CHP here, and they're the folks with the authority to enforce the vehicle code provisions. Our bridge patrol officers have the authority to enforce our master ordinance, but we don't have a mechanism or the system in place to, you know, issue or administer traffic tickets. And I think, you know, our number one priority is safety and security of the bridge and suicide prevention. So we would leave that enforcement to the CHP should it ever become necessary.
Well, it may be something you want to monitor, because they're not really walking the sidewalk very often, I don't think. So it means they'd have to stop in that lane and double park and give somebody a ticket for about 5 minutes, and they'd probably get into an argument. So it'll probably create traffic problems. But I guess you and the committee can monitor that. The other question I had is, I had received a letter because I was chair of the advisory committee, which I did provide you, and you said you'd already received it, from Mark Shahinian. One of his recommendations was, one, focus on removing obstructions that padding surfaces. I realize it's difficult to remove most of the structures we have there are needed for work, I assume. And, but is there any part of this that, and maybe I missed it, increased padding surfaces? I can see why some of the bikers might like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great suggestion, Director Grossball, and we do use padding on objects that are directly in the path of travel of cyclists, meaning the security bollards and things of that nature. It is quite a heavy lift proposition to, you know, go out there and pad all the bicycle safety railings and the light poles and all the other things out there. So, you know, we'll certainly keep that top of mind, and if there's places that, you know, we identify as you know, a good opportunity to make it safer by putting padding, we certainly would. But I think, you know, there's just so much infrastructure out there. How would we accomplish that or maintain that? It's a tough proposition.
All right. And I guess I would ask that, and again, I defer to Bert and Mike on these bike issues primarily too, but I guess I would ask that maybe within a year, I realize you'll probably be reporting back periodically, but at least within a year that you come back to the committee and the board and give an update on progress on it and any other possible changes. Thank you.
Are there any other directors with questions or comments? Hearing none, then let me raise a couple I haven't heard. With regard to the draft amendment to the master ordinance, it seems very specific in its statement as to what hours bicycles would be allowed on which sidewalk. That seems to conflict, or at least not to allow for the flexibility for the changes in response to high winds that we've discussed. Is that flexibility provided for someplace in the amendment that I'm not seeing or elsewhere in the master ordinance? Or do we need to add an amendment that would permit us that flexibility? That's a question for staff. First, one of two.
It is accounted for in paragraph 5, subparagraph C. You know, it talks about daylight hours and what that means, and it says, you know, which hours will be determined within this range by the general manager, taking into account seasonal variations. I think that, you know, we've sort of generally considered that to give, you know, the GM and his delegates the authority to shift those hours as needed, and, you know, we would take that as the, you know, the authority to open the east sidewalk during times that, you know, aren't typically delineated or called out. We certainly could revisit the language and add that, though. I'll take that under consideration and consult with the attorneys we work with to come up with the language and see if there's something a little more clear there. That's a great suggestion, sir.
Okay, and if that reading of that particular language, if we're on the public record here as having the understanding you've given of it, then we may be fine. But I would appreciate your double checking with counsel to see if we might want, you know, by tomorrow maybe to look at a slight amendment that would better capture that. The other thing was one of the provisions with regard to e-bikes said that they should be moving not under electric power, but only under the power of the rider. And that seemed to me to have a few problems. One of which was, well, first of all, I think we've already captured what we want to do with regard to dealing with the concerns raised by e-bikes in providing a speed limit. That was, I think, one of the primary functions, frankly, of providing a speed limit. And so, you know, we don't need then to say you can't actually use your electric assist to get across the bridge. Second concern about that particular provision is how in heck do you enforce it? You know, of course, going up towards center span, climbing towards center span. If you saw somebody not moving his feet, you could assume that he or she is moving strictly under electric power. But on the downslope, once you get past center span, it's easily possible for anybody, anybody who bicycles across, just to relax and coast. Then the third concern, of course, is a lot of people use e-bikes precisely because, whether for physical reasons or for the loads they're carrying, kids, for example, their physical power is not enough to get the bike across the bridge, up and down the slope to and from center span. And so you want to be able to allow them the use of electric power. So why is that there?
Chair Therio, I hate to answer a question with a question. Are you referring to section 212, subparagraph C on page 125 of the packet?
You're going to have to give me a chance to get away from the meeting script here and get back to the ordinance itself, which is at the tag-in, but I will do that right now. Give me a moment here.
And I have it in front of me. If I read the section, that may provide the clarity. It states under section 212C on page 125, motorized bicycles or motor-driven cycles may use the bridge sidewalks in accordance with other provisions of this master ordinance pertaining to bicycles, provided the engine or motors are not in operation and the motor-driven cycle or motorized bicycle is propelled by human power only. Is that what you're referring to?
That would be exactly what I'm referring to.
Okay, and that's subject to a little bit of confusion for a lot of folks. Motorized bicycle and motor-driven cycles, as defined in the Vehicle Code sections 405 and 406, refer to mopeds and those sort of gasoline-driven motorcycles that you rarely see anymore these days. There's no prohibition on electric bikes and their source of power or how they're operated in this ordinance language. Because frankly, most electric bikes, you generally can't turn off the power assist, or, you may have options to, use the lower or higher levels of power assist. But this subparagraph C refers to mopeds and, gasoline powered bicycle conversions. We could have taken that language out, but it didn't seem wise to take it out because those items still exist out there. And so we left it in. That's existing language in the current master ordinance. So, we just laid out that whole section in terms of, what it will look like, given the board approval to move forward. Does that answer your question?
If I may, this is Dennis, if I could expand. So as crafted, the ordinance before you allows an electric bike class 2 to use throttle only to cross the bridge. The section C just referred to does not preclude that, and as crafted, class 2 bikes do not have to pedal. But any non-electric motorized bike would have to be have the motor turned off, as C stated, and that's because of they're not as flexible as electric bikes in terms of their ability to speed up and slow down.
Okay, I understand the distinction now. For the sake of some who are as slow as myself, it might actually be good to refer specifically to the distinction in that section. Good. Thank you for the explanation. That's it for my questions.
Can I comment further on that same area, please? This is Bert.
Yes, please go ahead, Director Hill.
Yeah, in section E, that sentence I think could be improved. That all entrances to bridge sidewalks conspicuous signs shall be posted cautioning cyclists that wind may be hazardous and advising cyclists they should walk their bicycles across the bridge is a little bit confusing. If it said when wind is hazardous or something like that, it could be more clearly written. And if you understand what I'm saying, I would think. If you read it as it is, it's not particularly clear what someone is supposed to do or not do in general.
Yeah, I think Director Hill, the intent of that paragraph was to address the recommendation that recommendation number 5 on page 4 of the packet to install additional high wind advisory signage and, additionally establish this operating procedure to allow cyclists to use the east sidewalk. But that this subparagraph E basically stipulates that we'll have that sort of signage, and it currently exists. There's signage at the sidewalk entrances that says, caution wind hazards on the bridge. And, we want to expand on that signage and make sure it's, very clear and very well placed.
Well, that's why I suggested maybe using the word when rather than that, because it clarifies that when that condition exists.
Oh, when wind may be hazardous. Are you suggesting, Director Hill, like a changeable sign that we would only use when during the high wind events?
Where they should be walking their bikes, where you advise that they should be walking their bikes.
Yeah, the intent of this signage is similar to the intent where you drive down a freeway with steep slopes on the side and it says potential rock falls ahead. This is just to give people who may not be familiar with the area that there's a potential for high wind on the bridge. And so it's a pretty standardized style of communicating of an area that commonly has a hazard to give a novice to the area a heads up of the hazard. The intent of this was not to have a changeable message sign, but merely to let people know that the wind may be hazardous coming up. And I think the intent of that is clear for the standpoint of an ordinance.
Okay. If you feel so.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments from directors? Then that is the conclusion of the director's discussion on this. But Madam Secretary, do we have members of the public who want to talk on this item?
We do. We have Mr. David Pilpel. In a second, I'm going to unmute the line and have him join us. David, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Great discussion. I support the staff recommendation. As Director Grossbull suggested, I would add a request for review after 6 months or a year, or if circumstances warrant sooner, but definitely 6 months or a year to see how these changes are impacting things. I think very strongly that last week's anti-vax protest incident shows that control of facilities, bridge facilities in particular, is absolutely needed for safety of district employees and the public, whether they're motorists, bicyclists, pedestrians, CHP, everybody. It's a very limited, small space, and it's absolutely important that the general manager, the bridge captain have the ability to make changes as circumstances warrant. Thanks for including the draft ordinance. I think that's a good practice going forward. On page 7 of the ordinance, page 123, 124 of the numbered pages, 125 of the numbered pages, section 3, establishing the new committee. I'm not sure if that language could be interpreted as only representatives of the bicyclist and pedestrian communities as opposed to members of the public interested in bicyclist and pedestrian access to district facilities and services. You might want to consider that language and whether there's appropriate guidance here or elsewhere about how members would be appointed to that committee, or if there's, again, perhaps language elsewhere governing all district committees and how members are appointed. I agree that daylight hours could be reworded to cover other instances of inclement weather or other operating conditions. That may be something to examine either today, tonight, or in the future. The comprehensive staff report really is a model for public process. There was a study, there was a town hall, there was a hearing, the responses, it's all there. This is really well done and well documented. And I can follow up with any other appropriate district staff and any further comments or questions that I might have. Staff has been incredibly great and responsive on this issue in particular, and I appreciate their work. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pilfeld. Madam Secretary, is there anyone else from the public wishing to comment?
We have no other speakers on the line.
Then, may I have a motion on agenda item 3?
Also moved. This is Bert.
I'll second it.
And there's a second. Madam Secretary, please do a roll call vote.
Thank you. We have a first from Director Hill and a second from Director Cochran, starting with Director Arnold is absent. Director Conroy is absent. Director Fredericks.
Yes.
Director Garbarino.
Yes.
Director Giudice is absent. Director Grossbull.
Yes.
Director Hernandez is absent. Director Hill.
Yes.
Director Maston.
Aye.
Director Milgar is absent. Director Rabbit.
Aye.
Director Rodoni.
Aye.
Director Snyder.
Aye.
Director Stephanie is absent. Second Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
First Vice President Tirio.
Yes.
Yes. And President Parr.
Aye.
And
Thank you.
Go.
Okay. And that certainly sounds as though the motion passes.
It sure does. You have 11 ayes.
Okay, and yeah, again, I raised a couple of points that might require minor amendment. Maybe we can hear about them tomorrow. Moving on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is a status report from board appointees on the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Board. President Parr, Director Garbarino, which of you wants to jump in on this one?
Well, we just met yesterday, so
the news is all fresh, and I do believe that Director Garbarino will give the report.
All right, Director Garbarino, the fresh news.
Thank you, directors. I'll start by stating that it was Farhad's last meeting, so it was tremendously bittersweet. There were lots of thanks for his efforts to truly, literally get the train off and running. And while many of us were saddened, it's our sincere hope that he enjoys his retirement, time with his grandchildren, and this is not the last that we see of him personally and professionally. Items of note on the agenda were from the regular calendar, the approval of engineering and design support services with additional vehicular traffic signal design, which also, and perhaps my colleagues that are also on the SMART board can correct me if I'm wrong, also included bike safety. In addition to that, we approved and continued our federal advocacy services with no increase in that contract with Van Scoyote and Associates in Washington, D.C. In addition, we reviewed and accepted SMART's fiscal year 2020-21 annual financial report with a very favorable report from the auditors, and also a memorandum that was favorable on internal control. We reviewed and approved the short-term transit plan, and then finally heard a report on freight and related activities in which we as board members decided to continue with the thought that we would be operating the freight services in-house. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Garbarino. Any questions for Director Garbarino? Director Parr or President Parr, do you have anything you wanted to say to supplement Director Garbarino's report?
I don't. Hers is always well done. Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome, all.
Thank you both also. Director Rabbit, I usually give you a chance to jump in here. You want to jump in?
I think Patty does a wonderful job. I will only say that right now, or for the past so many years, the freight operations that have been running by NW Pico, as we call it, they basically have 4 customers, and they're all right here in Petaluma. 3 of the 4 really deal with animal feed, poultry feed, and it comes in bulk. The 4th one is Lagunitas Brewery. So we look forward to continuing that to keep those trucks off the congested highway. And obviously it's a greener alternative and everything else. And we also look forward to being smart about our business sense in freight operations, expanding where we can, and continuing to provide that service. I think it's a valuable service to the North Bay. So that's all I have to add. Thanks.
I have often taken advantage of the Petaluma facilities of Lagunitas Brewery, so thank you for that also. Are there any other board members who have questions or comments on Director Garbarino's report and Director Rabbit's comments? Then, Madam Secretary, are there any members of the public who want to talk about this?
We have no speakers on this item.
Okay. So the next thing would be, there's no action required on this, so the next thing would be to move on to item number 5, status report on engineering projects. Our report begins on page 129 of our packet. Ms. Bauer-Furbush, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my written report is before you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have for me.
Are there members of the board who have questions for Ms. Bauer-Furbush? Hearing none, and there being no action required, I'll ask anyway, is there anyone from the public who wants to speak on this item or under general public comment on item number 6?
We have no further speakers on item 5 or under item 6.
Then the next item would be a motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move. Cochran.
And a second?
A second.
And then a second.
All right.
Various attempts at a second. I'm sure, Madam Secretary, you will choose one. I will give a second to hear if there are any objections to adjourning. I hear none, so we are adjourned at 10:53. Thank you, everyone.